So as we come to a conclusion on the front nine, we can already see some of the benefits of construction. In particular, it's dry. You know, we always go back to firm and fast being a piece of the fabric at Seminole, but it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to demonstrate it. And we've got the tools in the ground now to be able to demonstrate a firm and fast golf course. It was really good before. It was awesome before. I think most people would tell you it was an incredible experience. It's better now. It's better now. I am Nelson Crone. I'm the Director of Golf Course Operations here at Seminole Golf Club. I was brought on about 5.5 months ahead of the Walker Cup. And after a super successful Walker Cup, we discussed what the next stages of the golf course would be and, you know, where I would take the golf course. And so as a few months went by, I got to experience my first summer here at Seminole. And during the course of the summer, when the golf course is closed, we do receive a tremendous amount of rainfall. And what I quickly noticed, the weather was just taking its toll on the golf course from just lake bank erosion perspective, collapsing bunker edges, constantly washing out bunkers. And each time it rained, the asset, you know, deteriorated a little bit. And so my thought was, we'll review the systems and see what needs to be done. And pretty quickly after we started putting shovels in the ground just to investigate, we realized that, you know, Seminole being a 100-year-old golf course just really lacked some of the modern infrastructure that would be required to, you know, handle these kinds of storm events.
As with a lot of these projects, you know, the impetus for the work starts with something that's not architectural. It's infrastructure, and it's looking at the features of the golf course and the club, in this case with Nelson Crone being the new superintendent here, having a look at, okay, what's under the ground? What's there from a drainage perspective? How do I take care of these bunkers? What's the situation with the greens? You know, they had been rebuilt some 30, 40 years ago, so you're looking at a situation where they're at their life expectancy as it relates to greens construction, and, you know, how do you move forward? And then these questions always lead to, okay, well, if we're going to redo the infrastructure that's underneath the golf course, what golf course are we looking at?
Pretty early on, when I started looking at the architecture at Seminole, I found some discrepancies from everything I had read about Seminole to what was actually on the ground. It was pretty clear that the golf course had really evolved over time, which every golf course does. So this one wasn't unique in that sense. It was just like the rest of them that, you know, ebb and flow, if you will.
He thought it was time to rebuild the greens in order to provide better championship conditions for the club. So when you combine all of those things together, it became a question of, you know, we need to rebuild the greens. What greens are we rebuilding?
In the 80s and early 90s, Brian Silva was brought in because the greens were past their useful life cycle, and he was commissioned to build USGA spec greens, which included gravel. So we knew once we hit gravel that we were at the Silva green. But when we went further down, we started finding the Ross greens.
I would describe the set of greens that were here when we came on the property as fearsome, strong slopes, but just based on slope. Not a lot of character in the undulation, not a lot of movement in the surfaces, just tilted one way or the other.
After the war, the course went through a period of significant decline. Wilson was brought back in the 50s. He put his own touch on putting greens, and the Wilson greens from the late 50s kind of all the way through the 1980s basically were untouched, if you will.
I think it was a situation where the hole locations became fairly predictable. I mean, you would know, certainly on a few of the greens, you were limited to very few areas where you could put the hole locations. And when we look at the greens that were designed by Ross, there were segments to them. There were areas where you were trying to play a shot to it, but you could utilize an internal contour to feed a ball towards it if you couldn't get directly at it.
And we have images of nearly every one of the greens. They're super descriptive. And Gil did a lot of his work kind of using those images. Some of the greens that were drastically different from the Wilson era are really just 1, 7, and 9.
And they're very clear in the planning and how they were set up. Not so clear as number 9 in the aerial photograph. It appears that the green may have been the simpler version of it, but it was probably the least interesting green on the entire golf course. And so as a group, we felt like it was important to go back to Ross's design, which I honestly think may be the best green that's going to be out on the golf course now, just because of the different levels, the way it rolls off, the false front. I mean, there's a lot of, for a shortish par 5 in the modern game, I think it's going to provide some really, really interesting third shots into it, and it will also dramatically impact your decision making about wanting to go for it in 2. And 7 I've talked a little bit about, but you know, it's a dramatic departure from the old green, but we think really, really indicative of what he put on paper and what he actually built. And 1 is different from a shape perspective.
If you looked really hard at number 1 green, for example, where Gil has restored the back right hole location, it was there all along. The landform was there. He just recaptured it. And kind of the wings on the front of that green, they've always been there. And when he started digging the bunkers on the left and right, we actually chased the bunker sand from the Ross era and found the outline of the old bunker, which is just, you know, really kind of exciting stuff.
We love being in the dirt. I mean, that's the best part of the job, but I think that there's an intricate part of what we do when we restore these golf courses, and that's primarily been Josh McFadden on an excavator, where when we see a Ross diagram that shows a hollow in the middle of the 4th green, right? That was kind of a Biarritz, but we don't want to say that because it really wasn't. Let's dig down and kind of create that now and see how it relates to the rest of the green. Well, Josh started digging and we found the original layer, and it was down there. And we had this happen numerous times. How do we know it was original? Well, the architects of that era, they wanted to retain moisture in the greens. Like, now we're doing everything we can to get moisture out. So there was always this black layer of sort of heavier, more fertile soil, which was what they would use to grow grass, you know, to keep some moisture in the soil for the health of turf. So we were able to find this dark layer and chase it through sections of the greens and get those sections back to it. So we felt 100% confident that we were able to go ahead and find exactly where these had sat at one point in time.
My job as the director of grounds, if you will, is obviously not to make those decisions, but it's just to provide information. I provided the club with what the Ross greens look like, overlaid on top of the existing Wilson greens. They thought at the end of the day that they should kind of honor their Ross heritage and bring it back to what it was, how Mr. Ross left it. Seminole's location is particularly a challenging one in the sense that, you know, it really is truly a seaside golf course. The East Ridge, as we call it, is just feet away from the tides going in and out on it. And, you know, as a result, the proximity to the ocean brings on significant challenges that a lot of inland golf courses don't, you know, have to deal with. It became pretty clear that we needed to kind of study what Seminole's coastal vulnerability was, from a potential storm surge issue, a high tide issue, king tide issues, hurricane readiness, and then lastly, high water tables, and really try and measure where the water tables had been and where we thought they were going. And it turned out Seminole is pretty well equipped for hurricanes. In fact, the East Dune that was populated in vegetation in the 1980s is a pristine example of what to do to combat storm surge. What I was unprepared for was the water table. And it really took everyone here at the club, in particular myself, by surprise. It's a minimum to be able to grow grass above a water table. You need at least 12 inches. I wouldn't call that ideal. Some of the numbers that we found were really low, 1/10 of an inch above the water table. Some parts of the fairways, like our practice facility, the iron range as we call it, some areas were at sea level and touching the water table. When the water table is really high, it can pose a challenge in your storage space in your soil for additional rain events. So if your water table is at X and your top of ground is at X+1 and you get an X+2 rain, you are at total saturation, which obviously leads to incredibly soft conditions, but it also leads to turf grass decline, poor rooting, and other various diseases and pests and all kinds of different challenges. Our team went to great lengths to keep these areas dry. But at the end of the day, Mother Nature's always going to win.
You worked with an engineer to decide how can we get the water out of here quicker, and then also what do we need to do to raise it so that we don't suffer from inundation for a long period of time.
It turned out that after doing all the geotech studies that we had over 14 acres of low-lying ground that were particularly subject to this high water table.
Bigger pumps, 12-inch trunk lines underneath the golf course, 2-inch drainage underneath the entire golf course, so we can take that water and move it out of here a lot quicker. The combination of moving it out but also raising subtly and I think elegantly as it relates to the golf course is really what we were looking at. You're not talking about raising 95 to 100 acres that the golf course sits on. It's just the bowl, if you will, to get that up and then make sure that we've got positive surface flow, because a lot of the fairways out here were dead flat. So what we did was strategically raise areas, use features like the backs of bunkers to kind of have the skirt or the tail of the bunker feed out, which creates a little bit more elevation, which sheds water in different directions.
Our members would know that if you hit down the left side of number 1, which is one of the lowest parts of the golf course, you were going to have kind of a wet lie, and there's a good chance you might hit it fat. Down the left side of 3, in between 12 and 14. I could go on and on and on. So the most extreme raise we had across the property is about 14 inches. And so, we were able to look at how we slope. Like some of the work we did on 3 fairway was basically just continue the dune, like the feel of that moving forward. So wherever we could plug into existing contours that sat up above, we used that opportunity. And then we also armored all of the banks of the water features. So they've got now a fabric over the top. They were compacted, put in place so that, when we do have tidal events and strong water moving through the property, the erosion on the banks will be significantly less. Now eventually, we kind of had this number that we were targeting, which was 1.7 feet above sea level, and that number became significant to us during the course of the project because we know the mathematics of the coastal vulnerability study tells us that we're going to be fine for the next 25 to 30 years. In 25 to 30 years, the putting greens are going to need to be rebuilt. We're going to need a new irrigation system, and some of the drainage systems will be past their useful life cycle. So it seemed like a logical thing to do to solve out to 2050, if you will, and reevaluate then.
I mean, the holistic nature of this project is something we do everywhere. Working with any superintendent who comes into a situation, we're not going to look at it piece by piece by piece. If the club is willing and able to do it, we want to solve the drainage issues, we want to solve the irrigation issues, we want to solve the greens issues, on and on and on, and that's what we did on this project. And so I think when you look at the architectural piece, you just want to be certain. So here we're dealing with what are we finding in the ground, what are we seeing on paper, what existed prior, so there's a little bit more connect the dots. And when you can see in the dirt that you are connecting the dots appropriately, That's a really good feeling.